What if I told you that one of the deadliest events in human history may not have been exactly what we think it was? The Black Death, a name that sends shivers down the spine even centuries later, wiped out an estimated 75 to 200 million people in the 14th century. But how did this terrifying plague spread so fast? And was it really caused by what we've always been told? The year was 1347. Europe was thriving in some places, struggling in others, but life for most was predictable, until a shadow fell across the continent. That shadow came not in the form of an army or an invading empire, but in a sickness. It started quietly, strange swellings in the armpits or groin, fever, chills. But within days, those infected would be writhing in agony, their bodies covered in blackened sores, and then, they were gone. Entire villages could vanish in the span of weeks. History tells us the Black Death was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas living on black rats. The theory goes like this: merchant ships traveling between Asia and Europe unknowingly carried infected rats aboard. The fleas, desperate for a warm-blooded host, bit humans, and the disease spread from port to port, city to city, until the entire continent was in its grip. But here's where the mystery deepens. If fleas and rats were the main carriers, why did the plague spread so incredibly fast? In some regions, the disease moved far quicker than rats could have traveled. Entire towns hundreds of miles apart would report outbreaks almost simultaneously, with no clear connection between them. Modern researchers have begun to question the traditional story. Some point to historical records that suggest the disease might have spread through the air, a form of pneumonic plague, far deadlier and much more contagious than the flea-borne variety. In this version, all it would take is for one infected person to cough or sneeze in a crowded market, and the infection could leap from person to person like wildfire. Others propose an even more unsettling possibility, that the Black Death wasn't just one disease, but a combination of multiple pathogens striking at once. This could explain why symptoms varied so widely, and why the mortality rate was so staggering, killing in some places 50, 60, even 90% of the population. And then there's the question of its origin. The commonly accepted theory is that it began somewhere in Central Asia, possibly in the grasslands near modern-day Mongolia. Caravans along the Silk Road may have carried it westward, reaching Crimea, and from there, Genoese merchant ships brought it to Sicily. But new genetic evidence from ancient plague victims tells a slightly different tale, suggesting the bacterium might have been circulating in Europe for decades before the famous outbreak of 1347. If that's true, the Black Death wasn't a sudden invader from the east, it was a silent predator already lurking in the shadows of European life, just waiting for the perfect conditions to explode. Those conditions came in the form of famine, war, and a population weakened by years of hardship. The early 14th century saw a period known as the Great Famine, when poor harvests left millions malnourished. Their immune systems were fragile, making them easy prey. And add to that the cramped, unsanitary living conditions of medieval cities, and you have the perfect breeding ground for disease. The psychological impact was just as devastating. People had no understanding of germs, bacteria, or viruses. Some believed it was a punishment from God. Others thought it was caused by poisonous vapors in the air, called miasma. Fear turned neighbor against neighbor. In some towns, strangers were chased away violently. In others, religious minorities, especially Jewish communities, were falsely accused of poisoning wells and were massacred in brutal waves of persecution. Travel and trade, once the lifeblood of cities, became deadly risks. Merchants abandoned their routes, entire ports fell silent, streets echoed with the cries of the sick and the wails of those who had lost everything. And then, almost as suddenly as it had arrived, the plague began to retreat. By the early 1350s, much of Europe had seen the worst of it pass, but, it didn't disappear completely. Outbreaks would flare up for centuries afterward, each one a grim reminder of the 14th century's great killer. Even today, the Black Death leaves us with unanswered questions. Was it truly just Yersinia pestis or something far more complex? Did it come from faraway lands, or had it always been here waiting? And if it spread so quickly in a world without planes, trains, or cars, what could happen if a similar pathogen emerged now, in our interconnected world? One thing is certain: the Black Death changed Europe forever. It altered economies, shifted social structures, and even shaped the course of art and religion. In the wake of so much death, survivors found new opportunities, wages rose for workers, and feudalism began to weaken. Out of tragedy came transformation. But the haunting lesson remains: sometimes the greatest threats to humanity are not the ones we can see coming, but the ones that move invisibly, silently, until it's too late. And that is the enduring enigma of the Black Death, a mystery that still,